Oh no, Larian Bros. Not like this. I thought Larian was going to become a big, legit studio. I thought they were going to be the AAA developer to end all RPG developers. I thought they were going to handcraft everything and intimately write every line of dialogue, code every line, and create a masterpiece of a game that was bigger and better than Baldur's Gate 3, a game, by the way, which wasn't very good to begin with. We were told, screamed at, that Larian were the new gold standard when it came to RPGs from people who don't know what they're talking about. The same people who would go on to glaze Expedition 33 when that came out this year. Like Baldur's Gate 3, Larian, and Swen are a complete joke. And here's a really good here's a very good explanation as to why. Larian Studios, acclaimed for Baldur's Gate 3 and absolutely nothing else, is planning its new game, Divinity, following the successful formula of its predecessors with early access. So they're just going to put out a buggy, broken mess and then eventually do a final release. According to Swen Vincke, head of Larian, this approach helps in the evolution of the games, even though it makes the process challenging for the developers. The active participation of the community is vital. Seeing how players get involved and make suggestions shapes the game in a unique way. The new Divinity revealed at the Game Awards promises to surpass Baldur's Gate 3 in every aspect. Wow, yeah. Wow, they're going to have even more bots on Steam than they did before. Incorporating generative artificial intelligence to unleash the developer's creativity. So that's actually why I wanted to make this video and why this is such a controversy and why this is kind of like a major red flag. Larian has admitted that they are using AI to generate assets. They are using AI to generate art. They are using it to generate lines of dialogue. They are using it to conceptualize story elements. They are using it to make their game instead of just paying employees to do it for them. This is how Larian is going to die. And what's interesting is how many people, like, rabid hardcore Baldur's Gate 3 fans immediately called foul on this, Like I know a lot of people who worship Baldur's Gate 3 who are already very concerned about Divinity, who have already realized that, like, wait, there's no possible way this game is going to be good. Without the DMD license, Larian really has nothing to hedge their bets on. There's not going to be any massive built-in audience that they for this that they like they did with the last game, and until they like get a hold of the Ultima IP, I don't really see anybody really worshiping them again. But like seeing this situation, seeing how little anybody gives a shit about Divinity, seeing how like people are rallying and like kind of crying foul and like acknowledging this to the point where Swen himself is actually, let me see here, Swen himself is doing damage control. Now, if you don't know who Swen is, he's the guy that the industry tried propping up as this gold standard, as this someone who doesn't overwork his employees, who pays them what they're worth, who does basically everything Nintendo does, basically doesn't use AI, right? And what happens? Immediately, they confirm that they are indeed using AI for Divinity, and they immediately try and backtrack. They immediately try and do damage control. Holy fuck, guys. We're not pushing hard for or replacing concept artists with AI. Like, that's not the allegation. Like, you said that you were using AI. That's actually worse than just replacing concept artists specifically, because you're doing so much more with AI than just replacing the artist. But we have a team of 72 artists, of which 23 are concept artists, and we are hiring more. The art they create is original, and I'm very proud of what they do. But you're using AI. It's I was asked explicitly about concept art and our use of Gen AI. I answered that we use it to explore things. I didn't say we use it to develop concept art. The artists do that. They do that using AI, and they are indeed world class artists because they use AI. We use AI tools to explore references, just like we use Google and art books. At the very early ideation stage, we use it as a rough outline for composition, which we replace with original concept art. There is no comparison. So basically, they're like building the game on this skeleton of AI. So they're just like having the AI generate some concept, and then they're having like their artists refine whatever the AI spits out with no thought into consideration or human skill. Like, why not just have the artist do it? Okay, like using AI for research purposes, like what a giant cope. That's not what this means. He is in the early stages of trying to replace his artists with AI, and that cannot be disputed. I talked about how we use ML here if you would like to know more. We've hired creatives for their talent and not for their ability to do what a machine suggests, but they can experiment with these tools to make their lives easier. Yeah, yeah, what a cope. Yeah, he's not denying that they're using it. He just denies that it's a big deal. Yeah. So like it's very interesting to kind of see how quickly the worship of Swen like has just completely fallen apart, because this is like this guy was like the new Yoko Taro, right? He was the guy that was supposed to be the huge driving creative force behind video games, the big epic dude who was going to somehow like destroy Nintendo. And you know first of all, like Baldur's Gate 3 was not that big of a deal. But second of all, like the more and more we see of this guy and how he's coping about like generative AI, and about how more and more people are turning on him for being a complete fraud, like we are reaching the point where it's very possible that Divinity is going to be a complete flop, and kind of the return of, say, Andromeda, or like, Anthem or something like that. Cyberpunk 2077, where like, we have this huge worshipped, Western RPG studio who puts out all these RPGs that we're told are the biggest and best in the industries. The Knights of the Old Republic. I remember when Knights of the Old Republic came out, and like the big narrative was just how much better it was than JRPGs, right? Obviously, that wasn't true. That game wasn't even as sophisticated or fun as Final Fantasy VI. Okay, the difference in quality between Japanese RPGs and Western RPGs are just insane. And anyone who's played both will tell you that. But like the narrative out of the West has always been that like, well, Western RPGs give you more options. And it's just like, yeah, but that doesn't result in anything meaningful. It's not fun or engaging. Like, especially with something like Baldur's Gate 3, which kind of railroads you to the same conclusion anyway. It's like they always like Western RPGs are always about the illusion of choice, the illusion of freedom, the illusion of having all these options, and yet somehow always being like killed by radiation at the end of Fallout 3. No matter what you do, no matter who your party is, no matter your skill set, like you're always going to end the game the exact same way. That's kind of the mentality where we see from these people now, is that like it was very common for me to see like people do this thing like, well, I played the first 20 hours of Baldur's Gate 3 over and over and over again because it's just so good. Yeah, well, why don't you play past that? Like the reason for that is because as you go on through Baldur's Gate 3, your choices become more and more limited. You stop being able to do more and more things, and it becomes more and more railroaded, right? Like the way Larian structures their games is that they front load all of like the choices at the beginning of the game, try and create all these like wild consequences for your actions, and in actuality, it doesn't really amount to much. It's all just an illusion, man. It's all just a trick, and that's kind of what this boils down to: is that Swen is trying to trick you into thinking he's some base game dev, when in actuality he is doing everything he can to undermine his workers and to try and replace them with AI. Like that's we are in the early stages of that happening now, and it's interesting that this is like the tipping point that this is like the first major controversy that Baldur's Gate 3 has been in, because like this game has been a disaster, I would say, since it was in early access. It was super buggy, it was unfinished, it was degenerate, and yet, PC gamers worshipped it because, like, well, they needed something for that season. They needed something to pretend to be excited about for a bit so they could downplay the Nintendo game. Like that's just how these things go. And like now that Baldur's Gate 3 is like done and dusted, now that it's no longer relevant, now that nobody remembers it, now that it's like not really a thing anymore, like we're in this situation where, like, we're in the, like, Baldur's Gate is getting phased out. Larian's getting phased out. Swen's gonna get thrown under the bus, and like 20 years from now, like nobody's even gonna remember that Baldur's Gate 3 even exists. Even today, it's kind of cringe seeing people like try and say this game was like as popular or relevant as Skyrim, because that's obviously not true. It's so cringe hearing people say this is like one of the best RPGs ever made, because it's just like, no, it's not. Like it's really not. Like it's just a giant cope from the community as a whole. And what's going to be interesting is that, like, it's going to end the same way it ended back in the 2000s, back with Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, right? Because the narrative back then was like similar, is that like this game is so great, it's the greatest thing ever. Like it offers so many choices, and like in actuality, the game that people were actually playing was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Like people were actually playing GoldenEye more. People were playing like all these N64 games more. And those were the games that people actually remember, outside of this illusion of success, like gassing yourself up based on awards and things of that nature. Like Baldur's Gate 3 really has nothing going for it. Like this is not something that's going to stand the test of time. It's not going to be an all-time classic, and in a lot of ways it's already been forgotten, like, and this is the first major controversy of Larian's uh, career as a relevant video game developer. Like the instant they released their intentions of replacing their workers with AI, that led to a major rift between their base. We are in the early stages of people turning against Larian. And this is a studio that absolutely cannot afford to antagonize their fan base. The instant the fans go, they will have nothing going for them.